Welcome to the Sage Family Podcast,
where we explore natural homeschooling, gentle parenting,
simple living, and family adventure.
I'm Rachel Rainbolt, the Sage Family Mentor, coming to you from an island in the Pacific Northwest, where I live wild and free in connection with my hilarious husband and 3 growing sailors in our fixer-upper on the beach. So join us around the campfire and let's get living the family life of our dreams. This is episode 101, and today I'm here with Magdalena Garcia talking about pregnancy loss. Magdalena supports parental, mental, and emotional health by focusing on the mindset, strategies, and symbolic ways mothers and fathers can tend to their inner lives so they can tend to the inner lives of their children. One of the things we emphasize during this conversation is the need for support in healing around pregnancy loss. The grief we can experience as we move through it in the present and attempt to integrate it as part of our story moving forward is complex, particularly in a culture that doesn't hold space for it. But there are people who can. You can reach me at sagefamily.com/therapy, and you can reach Magdalena at circlesandbridges.com. Magdalena joined me in episode 95 to share a conversation about ceremony, and I feel so grateful to have her back with us again for this special topic of pregnancy loss. Welcome back to the show, Magdalena.
Thank you so much for having me, Rachel.
Will you remind us of who you are and what you're passionate about?
Well, I am passionate for all the reasons that we're going to talk about today. I'm passionate about maternal mental health. I'm passionate about having opportunities to connect with ourselves and think about our self-image as mothers, as parents, and then how that impacts our relationship with our children. Being able to move through our own difficult experiences in life gives us the capacity to then help our children as they experience their difficulties, and just builds a sense of resilience and capacity and a sense, just a deep sense of our goodness and our well-being. And that's why I think about all the time the idea of celebrating fiercely, grieving fully, and calibrating constantly on this path of parenthood.
Beautiful. I think your intros are always my favorite part. Conversations. I'm like, we could just end there and I'd be like, got my nourishment for the day. Thank you. But this is a very important topic, so I'm glad we do have more time and we get to wade through this together. So first, I'm hoping we can talk a bit about the types. What are the different types of pregnancy loss? And then just any helpful statistics that you have around them.
Yeah, so, there are several different types of loss. And I think I just want to first preface all of this by saying that everybody's experience around loss is very personal. So as we go through today and folks who are listening identify or don't, that just knowing that there's a lot of room in here for the unique experiences that every person has around this. So the different types, we have miscarriage, and in terms of statistics, the about 20% of pregnancies end in miscarriage, and a miscarriage is defined as a loss before 20 weeks. And kind of even if we just back up the prevalence of loss, right, that 30% of pregnancies end in a loss. They don't end up with a baby in your arms that you get to live with and care for in that way. So that's a pretty high statistic, and many, many more go unreported, right? Mm-hmm. So there's also stillbirth, and a stillbirth is classified as a loss after 20 weeks of gestation. And the statistic is about 1 in 167 births end in stillbirth. And if I think about me, I live in Los Angeles. It's a pretty big urban area, and I can imagine the 1 out of 167 is a lot that are living right around me in my city. And then we have losses with abortion. We have losses with terminations for medical reasons. And all of these losses carry heartbreak, carry long-lasting feelings that are sometimes hard to resolve, and different varying levels of community support.
Yeah, I think this part of the conversation can almost be sometimes hard to talk about because it can easily slip into a space of like a grief competition. You know, I don't expect that's something that I've seen, like it like devolves into that kind of quickly and easily. But I do think it's helpful to talk about the different types of loss and to give them names, right? Names help us like make sense of things. They help us connect with other people who have similar shared experiences. They help us connect with resources, ceremonies, physical supports, rituals, all sorts of things like that, kind of when we have language to help us make sense of our experience. So I appreciate you kind of giving us that language to help us understand and make sense of our experience and potentially connect with better support for it.
Yeah. And the hope would be that these terms would provide a sense of either a starting place or an ending place, some place to begin. And it shifts and it changes, and how we identify, how we can honestly and authentically process what our experience was can depend a lot on the language that we are given, the language we feel comfortable using, the medical language, the cultural language, the social, the political language. But it is helpful. I found it especially helpful, like even when we begin to call a pregnancy loss a stillbirth, like after 20 weeks. And I never knew that before until I was looking at some of these statistics.
Yeah. What impacts how we experience pregnancy loss?
Yeah. I don't know, I'm just feeling into the many people who may be listening to this and knowing what those statistics are, that many listeners may have a personal experience of this. And I just want to say again that however we come to this topic, either personally or through witnessing it in others, that there's just such a varied experience of what happens for people, both in the moment, in the short term, and in the long term. So some of the impacts that I'll talk about are things that I have been codified through pre and perinatal psychology and work around maternal mental health. And they may resonate for some and not now or not yet for others. But, the first one is the context of the loss, right? If it was a miscarriage, if it was a stillbirth, it was an abortion, a termination for medical reasons, the context surrounding the loss can impact, again, how we process the grief and how we get support for it. If we have other living children, if it was our first experience at pregnancy, what our partner's experience is with loss, what the generational experience is with loss. And as I encountered my own experience, I began to find out, right? My mother, her mother, aunts, cousins, the stuff that isn't talked about. All of that's in the space when a fresh loss happens, and how our community through the generations has dealt with that loss, either openly, secretively, not dealing with it. All of that can come to the forefront as we experience our loss in whatever context we're experiencing it.
Yeah, we can grieve for the entire family line.
Yes, and we can put it in a box and try and forget it, just like everybody else, right?
Yeah.
I think also then that, and then it's, I think you mentioned it, like the layers of support. Like how many layers of support do we have? For many women, we have a partner, maybe parents, if people feel comfortable sharing or being supported by family members. But oftentimes the layers of support are not very deep. And that can impact the feeling of isolation in processing this particular kind of grief.
I like how you mentioned political too, because particularly in this place and in this time, the issue of pregnancy loss has taken on this whole almost disconnected from the actual lived experience of woman life of its own, and has had so much heaped on top of it and connected to it. And that I just want to acknowledge that that is going to significantly affect the impact of a pregnancy loss on you if you are pregnant and then you are not in a time and a place where that is, sort of against your will. A whole lot of a meaning might be assigned to that. That can make it significantly harder.
Yeah, yeah. 100%. And that is where people have to sublimate. They can't be out loud with their grief. Already there was, so much around, like, well, just don't talk about it, because if you talk about it, you might make it happen again. So there's lots of superstition in a sense, right? Like, and don't talk about it to me because I'm another birthing person and that's my worst fear. So if you talk to me, I'm going to get all freaked out. So women historically have had to keep things under wrap. But then when you add this political layer where there's so much misunderstanding around what actually happens for an individual in all of these circumstances, no matter what the context was for the loss, the amount of heartbreak, the amount of, the feelings of shame and guilt that go along with so much of this. Even, I hear moms who, lose a baby at 8 weeks and they're just sure that they did something to cause it. And that feeling continues, so that to actually tell people in a climate where everyone's wanting to have an opinion, people can feel very, very, very isolated in trying to be able to process and integrate their experience in order to move forward.
What is your personal experience with pregnancy loss?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. And, that's part of the reason why I'm here again with you, right? The first time I was on, I introduced myself as being a mother of 3 daughters, 2 who were lost in utero, and 1 who is 16 and is now 17, who I'm sure is sleeping in very late right now. And the last time I couldn't even get to the rest of my bio, because that was it. That was the completion of who I was and who I was showing up as, and that's me. Our first baby, it was first time pregnant, very, very excited. And at 23 weeks, I found out that she had a life-threatening illness, and we needed to move into neonatal palliative care measures. So at almost 24 weeks, I gave birth to her, and in the matter of minutes, I said hello and goodbye to her. The normal birth, life, death process was put right side by side. And as I held her and my husband held her, and there were also 4 other family members in the room as we held her and loved her and talked to her, there was so much, heartbreak, like palpable heartbreak. And then this incredible joy. Again, just like birth and death, and that's something we don't really talk about much. It's, of course, we live and we die. And so right on the other side of birth, we never want to talk about it, but right on the other side of birth is death. And so in that moment when both were right next to each other, and my heart broke in this way I had never experienced, the cracks, right? In a kintsugi kind of way, the cracks were filled with this love, this golden appreciation for the sacredness of life. And all the loss that came around with all of my fantasies, all the illusions that it was all just going to work out. All of those were out the door.
It's like you're grieving an entire life that you imagined, a whole world with this soul moving around alongside you. It's like so many layers of grief, the grief of on the identity level, the grief of the life you imagined and the world you imagined, the grief at having to say goodbye to this soul in the way that you thought that you would be in connection with them. I just want to bear witness to the depth of the story that you're sharing with us and know that I'm receiving it with a heart full of gratitude and love and appreciation for both you and for the baby, for helping us to connect with that experience in a really personal way. Like even on your face, I see the love for this baby who knew nothing but love, right? Like coming from the womb into your arms and leaving sort of this plane of existence, like knowing nothing but that love that you had for them, that I can see on your face and hear in your voice. I'm just honored to witness it. So thank you for letting us come inside that experience alongside you.
Yeah. Thank you for holding that space for me, for her, for the rest of us in the concentric circles of the ripples, people who were impacted by this experience. And yeah, it's 19 years. She would be 19 now. And my wedding anniversary is actually July 10th, but I can never actually remember the date because her due date was July 6th. And so when our wedding anniversary comes up, I have to try and remember if it's the 6th or the 10th. And for 19 years, I each time, why can't I remember if it's the 6th or the 10th? Right, because there was indelibly, especially as a first pregnancy, like the due date, it's the biggest holiday to look forward to ever. And so I also just want to honor that we're sitting here in this time, July 5th, that it is quite serendipitous rather.
Yeah.
That we get to sit together and honor this being that has never left me and did come in full love and left in love. And then my experience with her went on to shape my next experiences. So 6 months after her, I got pregnant again. We were very much intending to start a family, and 6 months later, I had a miscarriage at 6 weeks that came out of nowhere and was quite shocking. And we had to take a pause. But then 6 months later, I got pregnant again, and that is our daughter, who is now 17.
What are some of, I'm going to talk about my experience too, but I know, the next question on the list was what kinds of support can be helpful. But as I'm listening to your story, something that comes up for me when I'm trying to hold space for women to share their stories with me is like all of the incredibly unhelpful things that people said to me, like the well-intentioned but incredibly unhelpful things that people said to me. If you would be willing to share, what are some of the very unhelpful things that people that they responded to you with, with
Yeah.
the best of intention, but that were not helpful?
Yeah. And I just feel for people. People just get so stuck with what to say. Yeah, I think it was only 6 weeks, or at least your baby wasn't alive for a long time, so you didn't have to get too connected. There's at least you have a healthy child now, so don't worry about all that came before. And then I think also let's not talk about those losses because they have nothing to do with your current child. Those are gone and done and forgotten. Now it's move on. Now it's about this child. That's just something sad and bad that happened to you in some distant past.
Yeah, anytime the statement starts with "at least," that's just
That's it.
hard no.
That's it. Don't even just stop there. Pause.
Red flag. Red flag.
Yes.
Don't say it. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. At least you weren't farther along in your pregnancy. At least you have your children already. At least, any of those at least statements. There's a reason for everything. God wanted your baby. Just on and on and on. The things that people say they do not mean to be cruel, but really the things they're saying are to make themselves more comfortable.
Yeah.
The things that they're saying, I would argue, are really to help them to allow any emotional discomfort to move through them quickly. Like it allows them to just like they're trying, it's like, oh, let me receive this right. No, that's too uncomfortable. And they say something to allow it to feel okay for them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and then in particular cases, like I would never make that choice. Ooh. I would never do that in any direction. Right? Yes. That's not how I would handle it. You don't really have a right to feel sad because you made a choice. I mean, now we're getting into some of the real sticky, icky places that people can go with any of these.
Gosh, yes. One of the things that I said in an email to you when you reached out about the possibility of sharing this story was that you 100% do not need my validation at all whatsoever. And I want to share that going into each pregnancy, my husband and I discussed that is the choice that I would make, that if my baby was given a terminal diagnosis, that I would make the same choice that you made, which, it's almost like we shouldn't have to make that disclaimer. And yet I feel so much shame and judgment and lack of space being held for the grief that is real, and even for these conversations with that judgment. It's like that, just like it's a slammed door in your face. So like sharing that I would have made the same choice, though, like you shouldn't need that because everyone's free to make their own choice and there's no judgment either way, but it just felt important in opening the door even, which speaks to just the cultural place that we're at, which kind of breaks my heart.
Yeah, well, and I think that this is where parents get caught in a double bind. This is the double bind that has nothing to do with us individually, my relationship with my child. That once my child is out in the world and, everyone wants to look at what the mom especially is doing wrong. And why aren't you protecting your child more from social media? Why aren't you protecting them more from drugs and alcohol and all the stuff, right? And we run around trying to get organic food for our children because we don't want them to suffer. We want them to have the best life. We want them to get into the best college. So we try to send them to the best schools and help them with SAT prep. And we do all of these things to help them have a great life so they won't suffer. And yet at the most basic level, we have to be ashamed by making the most difficult choice to keep our child from suffering. And the statistic is that 95% of people who would receive a life-threatening diagnosis for their child would make the choice of moving away from inflicting suffering.
Yeah. Yes. I even remember having a conversation after I had, so my experience is that I had planned 3 pregnancies. I had 3 beautiful pregnancies, births, children, all healthy, all easy, all wonderful. And then we were sort of on the fence about whether or not we had, whether or not we wanted to have a 4th child. And so we sort of said, okay, we'll try one time. Like one time, and if we get pregnant, like then great, and if not, we're gonna close the door and take steps and move on into the next season of life. And sure enough, I got pregnant, and then had a miscarriage and lost that pregnancy. And so I think it was a unique experience. I experienced it as being very unique in that I don't hear the story very often of a woman having a miscarriage and then choosing not to get pregnant and have another child, which like I had never even really thought about that before. It never even crossed my mind, but it felt profoundly different in some way. Like I wasn't getting like a cleansing or I don't want to say redo or replacement, but it really like to have that be the final experience that like echoes on that I move forward with felt really hard and not as common. Like the rainbow baby thing, like everybody is so like celebratory of like, it's my rainbow baby, it's my rainbow baby.
Yes.
So it's just like to choose that was not going to be my experience. Felt kind of unique and hard and painful, and yet still felt right for me. But what I was going to say is that after I had a child, so before I had a child, the choice of like, if my life was in danger, like, of course you choose the baby. Once I had children that needed me, that I felt completely different about that. And again, this is one of those decisions that you have to make when you're pregnant that no one ever talks about.
Yeah.
Like after I had children outside of my body whose entire universes were just so deeply connected to my health and well-being, the thought of leaving them did not feel like the right choice for me at all. Like so I just want to sort of acknowledge that like there are so many choices, like like around pregnancy and childbirth that we don't talk about because of like the potential shame, the potential judgment, the lack of space that is held for that. And yet these decisions still have to be made and these experiences are still being had.
Yes.
Like we need to create more space for them. Yes.
We do. And I mean, if you think about, you ended that note back to me in sisterhood. I mean, and that really kind of brought me to tears because what we're talking to our sisters, we're talking to our daughters, our mothers, our aunts, our cousins. And as women, we understand this on a very deep level. And I have deep reverence for the many ways that motherhood happens and all the choices that mothers go through. And that somebody in my situation might not have made the same choice. And I have deep reverence for that, for them, for their experience. I have deep reverence for every which way that you could walk, because what I know from my own experience and anybody that I work with is that none of this is easy. None of it's just like, oh, I just, whatever, I made that choice, or I had that thing happen to me and it's done and I never look back. It is a forever process of uncovering and forgiving and coming to a new understanding of oneself and the context and the support systems. And that's where, when it becomes political, it doesn't make sense, because it's so very, very private and sacred. We're talking birth and death right in there together. And I remember my daughter used to say, when we would walk, I don't know why this just came in my mind, but thinking about, we would take walks, and I would walk on the outside by the street and she would walk on the inside. And at some point she said, Mom, I should walk on the outside. You're so much more important in society than I am. I mean, I'm a child. I'm like what? People don't depend on me for it. I'm like, babe, no, no. But she was getting at something, this thing of like you have people who depend on you. You are the center of many worlds. And that was part of why we only have one living child, because I knew that I could not do that to her. I could not be emotionally available to processing the potential for another loss while also being 100% emotionally available to her. I personally couldn't do that. Other women make the choice to keep going, like the rainbow babies, right? And keep going on after that. And wow, so amazing. I made the choice for myself. I couldn't do that in my way, in my time, and my context.
Yes. And we're going to talk about support, but I feel like the bar has been lowered even to the freedom to meet your need. The conversation should be, how can we support women and babies and children and families? But really the bar I feel like has dropped to even just having the freedom. I'm imagining myself laying there hemorrhaging on my deathbed, feeling like I have no choice in any of this. I have no autonomy to make any of these decisions for my own life and my own body. And that is feels horrific.
Right. And I mean, just with the intense, again, I use the word reverence, but the sacredness of motherhood and the sacredness of babies, of children. It's such a sacred act to become a mother and to have this immense responsibility and privilege to guide someone through their growing up years, that to take choice away in that matter, to me, it doesn't honor the reverence of the work that it takes to do that well, to do that with a full spirit, to do that with in community that comes around and helps you to move forward with your best self in honor of this young person.
Yes.
And so I also just want to honor here that there are mothers who have found themselves in my position and went on to have a child that they did get to care for, a child with many, many, many needs. And that was the right thing for them and their community. And they moved forward in spirit, and their heart expanded, and their compassion and their ability to be there for the rest of humankind. And again, I just want to note that there's just so many ways to do this.
Yeah.
And with each choice comes heartbreak, and each choice there is joy that can eventually be felt. And that's why I appreciate having this opportunity to lay it all out and be in honor of all the many ways and all the many paths.
Yeah. And the right choice is the choice that you know is right for yourself. And it's our job to support you in those choices that you make. I think when I experienced my pregnancy loss, I was sort of shocked that I knew nothing. Like, you don't know what you don't know, right? Like, at that point, I had 3 children. I had been advocating for all things like parenting babies and mothering babies and birth and breastfeeding and like all of the things, right? And I knew nothing about this, like on an emotional level, on a cultural level, ceremony, ritual, but also even just a physical level. Like I was like calling the doctor, like, what's going to happen now? What, like, so I'm going to give birth to a whatever weeks, old baby, and I do what with it? Like what, like even like the most like things that like right now, even hearing this, I'm sure people are like, that's vulgar. Why are you talking about that? Like I can like
Yes.
sense it in the air. And I want to
I know.
acknowledge, like, if we are not talking about this, how are women supposed to know like what their options are? What happens? What do we do? What is this going to feel like in my body? So many questions, like this profound realization that 1 in 5 women experience this, and I knew nothing about it. Like this incredibly common experience of being in a body with a uterus. I knew nothing. And that was like profound and almost layered onto the grief. And thank God, the universe, the goddess, whatever, that when I went through this, I was open and vulnerable and honest about it. And women connected with me in sisterhood and filled in that gap. Like, I had some close friends who had been through it, but I also had like some people I hadn't spoken to in years, like who reached out immediately and just wrapped me in the support that I needed, like sharing their experience, sharing what helped for them, talking about it, honoring it, acknowledging it. And I just feel to this day immensely grateful. It's like I still feel that connection of support to this day, all of these years later, to these women, and still work to pay it forward whenever I can. And this episode is some of that, paying it forward, that we need so much extra support, in part because despite how common this is, we have no knowledge of it, most of us, right? Like most of us don't.
No, yeah, and this is the point where why don't we know this? But we go deeper than that, right? Like, how many women understand their cycle, understand fertility, understand what's happening within their body every month? And so if we can't even have those conversations and coherent, deep, robust conversations in schools about sex ed and what happens, then getting to the point where there's loss, where there's all this stigma and this, like, well, you must have done something wrong, right? Again, like, it must be just even the miscarriage. I miscarried this.
I hate that term.
It. And even saying I lost, like, no, I didn't lose it. It wasn't like my keys, like, oh, you need to start wearing your keys on a carabiner or put them around. Like, no, it's not. I didn't lose this. This baby left. It was not time. It was not the right conditions. And just that language is such a subtle way, again, of like, something's kind of wrong with you, and you're kind of fundamentally women. not right, kind of bad. And we're just not going to talk about those things. Like it's 2024.
Yeah.
The fact that you got to that point, that I was at the point I was, and like this comes out of the blue.
Yeah.
What? Wait, what? Why don't I know that? Why don't I know this is a possibility? And why don't the doctors tell you, like, okay, your experience, here's what the next steps are. Did anybody tell me that a few days later my milk would come in? I left the hospital. I thought it was done. And suddenly, I'm a first time. I hadn't even gotten to that place in the childbirth education class. I hadn't gotten that far. I didn't even understand about milk and coming in. What? And now I'm having to do this thing and research sites where what?
Yeah, it's just remarkable. Like I just have this visceral memory of sitting there like, I have a master's degree in motherhood, basically. And my friend is sitting here telling me that like she was standing there looking over the toilet at this thing that had eye spots, and the doctor on the phone is telling her, you flush it. Like, how do we know nothing? Like I am so grateful that women came forward to connect with me and share their experiences after the fact. And I'm hoping that people have hung on long enough and are going to continue hanging on long enough to have this conversation so we can raise the level of like everyday discourse such that there is no longer this like dark shadowland that uterus bodied people are expected to walk through alone. Like I felt like I was completely in the dark, which felt significant given how much education and experience and like knowledge and research, like I just to be so deep in that world and know nothing was profound. And I have spent so much time since then trying to change that.
Yes, thank you for your work in that. And I'm so sorry that was where you found yourself on your fourth experience of motherhood.
So what kind of supports can be helpful for women who are navigating these experiences of loss?
Yeah, here we go. Here's where we dive into that. Yeah, I think you talked about the community and the connection, right? Just like, who can you tell about this? There's something about this, the secret in whatever way, and this like scarlet letter, that even just energetically somewhere within me, I feel bad and wrong. No matter the type of loss, so many women carry that with them. So many partners carry that with them. So who can you tell? For me, I found a chaplain at a local hospital ran a pregnancy loss support group twice a month, and I would drive the 45 minutes there twice a month to sit in a room of other parents just telling their story over and over and over again. We told our story just to keep hearing it, just to keep noticing it, and to keep noticing each other and how the story shifted and how different elements came into the story. That, oh, I forgot about that doctor who was so kind. Oh, I forgot about that person who was so painful. Just that's the coherence, like being able to build this coherent storyline that is uniquely ours, that doesn't have all the holes that trauma causes. Right?
Yeah.
So the community, the connection, and as a part of the resources, I think we'll put in a bunch of links to places where folks can go and get support for their unique situation.
Yeah. It really is in the telling and retelling of stories that we're able to make meaning from them and integrate them into who we are, how we fit in the world, so that we can it can be integrated as we move forward. It's really in the telling of those stories.
Yeah. And I think that that's where also the symbolic action comes in. Right? That is the ceremony, that is ritual. And again, because we all have unique stories, what our own personal symbolic action will look like will shift and can be very different from somebody else's. So what my ritual looks like on my daughter's birthday has shifted over the 19 years, and I hope to continue to be open enough to allow it to keep shifting into richer and richer territory that includes all of me and all of mine in it. So, giving ourselves permission and giving the people around us permission to do the weird, quote unquote, the weird things around milestones, the weird things around anniversaries. I pull out my memento box every year, and some years I just pull it out and I just know it's there. Some years I look through it. Every year I try to give myself permission to meet the moments for what that moment is asking for. So the shoulds, there's also people, going back to what people say that's unhelpful, why aren't you sadder?
Ugh.
Right? Like, you should be sadder. You should be, especially I think in terms of like a stillbirth. Right? Like, somebody may be processing and in the phase where they're really ready to move on. And other people are like, well, either why are you crying too much? Why aren't you crying enough? So all those shoulds, we're just going to put those shoulds. Those are the things that go in a box. We're going to put those in a box and let ourselves have the experience that we're having.
Yes.
Which I think goes to then this next part of the support. I mean, coming back to the layers of support, but there's this ring theory of support. Maybe you've heard of it, right?
You pour out.
You pour out, comfort
Love
in.
it. Yes.
Right? So, and that's something that, for anyone who's listening who maybe hasn't experienced pregnancy loss themselves, but has a close family member or friend who has, that idea that, like, the person closest to the loss, they get to have center stage, right? And we're just going to offer them lots and lots of comfort, and they get to dump everything out to us. The problem becomes when those outer layers, right, a friend, a family member begins dumping in, like, oh, I am so sad for your loss, and it's so horrible, and it reminds me of my own loss, and I've been thinking so much, and I can't sleep. And now that person who's trying to manage their own grief is now having to manage other people's grief. And that goes for any loss of any kind. But I think this one is, because it's such a nuanced, very particular texture to this kind of loss, that it can be so helpful to be able to dump out and let the comfort in.
Yes, I love that. The concentric circles of that ring theory. I learned that many years ago, and I still really to this day find value in it. Like, when I was losing my mother, like that, I kept that really at the forefront of my mind to give myself permission to, like, be in the center circle right now. I'm not going to take care of anyone else. And if anyone else tries to pour in, I'm not going to receive it. And when I'm supporting other people in loss, I will check in with myself. Where am I in these circles, right? Who can I pour out onto and who am I pouring into? I find it an incredibly helpful compass for navigating grief and placing myself within it and supporting people in it, whether that's myself or others.
Yeah. Oh, so good. So good to, I mean, basically what that is, that's a boundary, right? You were able to set a boundary with other people. Like, I know that I get to be center right here. I get to, because I'm the one at bat in grief right now. We will all take our turn at bat in grief in some way. It's my turn. I'm going to be here. No, you're going to keep your stuff.
when we are, especially when we are experiencing some sort of loss, like a pregnancy loss that's deeply connected to our own bodies, right? That like we get to own the fullness and the rightness for us of our feelings and our needs, and everyone else can pour in support or they can leave.
Yeah. 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 What a gift. What a gift to give ourselves permission. And hopefully anybody listening to this, right? Like if you can take something for yourself or for close people, yeah, people get to say, I can't take care of anybody else right now. I'm going through something pretty intense here.
Yeah.
And then all those outer rings, if they need to process, they get to keep going out from there.
Yes.
When my mom needed to process, it was not with me. It should not have been with me. It needed to go with someone else. It needs to go and keep and imagine if we all did that, we would be woo.
Yes, it feels very natural. Like that is the way it is naturally supposed to go. So I think as we're like navigating these losses, keeping that in mind is so powerful, particularly as mothers. We are so often cast in that role of caring, taking care of everyone else, taking care of everyone else's feelings. So people are so accustomed to bringing their feelings for you to metabolize and care for. And so to be clear on that ring, structure and where you are in it and hold boundaries around it is really helpful in terms of getting the support that you need. I really found that like giving myself permission to receive all the support that I needed was huge. Like normally I'm the giver, the caretaker of everyone else. So to give myself permission to receive any of the support that people were willing to send. I had a friend who lived in a different state who sent chocolate covered strawberries. And I remember distinctly, like I hadn't gotten out of bed in days. I'd just been sobbing and bleeding. And it was the first time I had smiled in like however long, was like eating this chocolate covered strawberry and sharing them with my kids, like from this friend who had experienced, losses herself and lived in a different state. Like just that permission to like, yes, like to receive, and this is what I need in this moment. And to know, like to have that longitudinal view that I'm going to pay it forward in future seasons. Like I can receive fully right now. And when I have capacity, I can pour out into others. Like that was helpful for me to keep in mind. And then I think like ceremony, ritual, all of that stuff felt incredibly important for me. That like, Clarissa Pinkola Estes, like descansos, I needed to stake it to the earth that like this happened and this mattered. And so I put my whole family in the car and we drove like 10 hours to this place that was really special to us and stayed in this like cabin by the river. And like I got a massage and we like buried something in the earth. And I bought like this necklace from this indigenous, person who like this was their land. Just the whole thing. Like I just went all in on like, yes, like this special, this mattered, this person's potential soul made a mark on the universe. And I need that to be tangible. And I am so grateful to this day that I did that I claimed that, even though it felt like there was no social cultural script for it at all whatsoever. Like I just stumbled through it and did it imperfectly and created it with my family. And that felt hugely supportive for me.
Yes. Oh gosh. I have the chocolate covered strawberries and this land and this action, and that's the symbolic action, right? That just like for me, I finished the baby book. I finished her baby book. It didn't just end. It didn't end with the heartbreak. I continued and I added people's responses to us. I added the email where we told people about the news. I added in the hospital tags and the footprints, and then we took her ashes to different places and and different people have different little bits of ashes. And this is also like again, like every year, I am now ready to have the remainder of her ashes be somewhere else. I haven't been ready yet. That's my process.
Yeah.
And I couldn't have rushed that. And I think some of the advice as well is to, if you have the opportunity, if there is a loss, if you have the opportunity to memorialize it, if the hospital, if the whatever circumstances that you can keep pieces of, again, like footprints or the hospital tags or some hair or the blanket or something that sometimes people feel very, even if in the moment, like, I don't need to see it, can you just pack it up? And maybe I just know that it exists and I may never, ever look at it.
Yeah.
I may ask you in 5 years to, do something different with it, or I might want to get it out. Because grief just, it's
spirals.
It's the spiral, right? And when an anniversary comes, or when there's a trigger event, somebody has a story like mine, I move back into the middle and touch sort of the heart again. And then I move back out, and I'm coming back in and coming back out. And I think, each of these things too, the memorializing, the ceremony, the ritual, a lot of it's about repair. Repair with myself, because of just what we talked about, all those layers of outside judgment and all the things we've internalized about wrongness and blame. Yeah. So I need to repair with myself. I get to repair with the baby who is not here anymore. And that repair looks a lot of different ways. I get to repair. And I think about repair, people go like, repair means you did something wrong. I think about repair like if there was a fabric that was ripped, my skirt, like, I love this skirt, like something in my life was ripped. I'm going to lovingly sew the pieces back together. I'm just that's the coherence. I'm just putting the two pieces back together. Yeah. And so that repair with the baby, how do I think about you? How do I include you? How are you welcome? Where do you belong? No matter what the loss, the reason or the context for the loss. And then there's the repair maybe with God, with the universe, with consciousness, with this expansion, this big idea, right? The fantasy, the illusion of safety, the hope that we all have that birth will happen here and death will happen way after, that we will not see the death of our children, that will happen way after we're gone. Like, okay, well, that bubble's burst, and now I have to have some repair with my sense of safety of life. And then there's our next children, or our living children who came before, the children who come next. How do we sew together our experience and their experience, either actually having gone through, children who are aware that there's been a loss, or a loss that came before them that is just energetically living in the field.
Yes. Yes. And I just want to add the little bit of space too for women for whom they're integrating the acceptance and the rightness of the situation for them and their peace with it. For me, there was an immense amount of sadness, and I just want to create that little bit of space for women for whom it feels right and they have peace with how things unfolded, for the rightness for their baby, for them, for the universe on whatever level, just this unconditionally loving acceptance from both of us to everyone listening for however your experience played out and whatever shows up for you in moving forward from that experience.
100%. And that is the complexity. That's why it's so, because again, when birth and death come right together, celebration and grief are right there holding hands. So I can say, I do not regret the path we took. I do not regret that. And I'm deeply sad that I could hold both of those, which doesn't negate either side. As humans, right, we want to go to like some duality. This is good or this is bad. You can do this or you can't do this. But like, how about the real space is right in the middle where like, I'm so bummed I had to do that and I'm so glad I did.
Yeah.
This tore me apart and it also opened me up in this new way. Grief, celebration, joy, love, all of it. And yeah, you know what? People might not be sad. They might just be in a celebratory, revelatory moment for a really long time. And there my fear is when people don't let themselves grieve because they feel like they have to really, because of the context, have to keep telling themselves they're not sad.
Yeah.
Because then it negates the choice. And that we're just going to blow that wide open and say,
Yes.
we are complex humans and we can hold all of that. And that is where the symbolic action, that's where ceremony, ritual, community can come help us hold all those pieces that seem like they don't go together, but they do.
What kinds of challenges can come up in our next pregnancy or in parenting our other children? And how can we address them?
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking in my case, I'll speak from, having a loss and then having a living child. How to talk about what came before her, how to talk about who came before her, how much of it is hers. I know that there are many families that do incorporate loss into the family storyline. So, I am a mother of 3, that my daughter would say, I had 2 sisters. I can't say that was my experience because of the loss that was in the field. My husband, his mom actually had 2 full-term stillbirths before the birth of his brother and then him. And the way stillbirth was addressed in the 50s, and I'm sure that is still the way, but it was not something to talk about. It was you literally move on, and this was just a bad thing that happened. So being able to own my story and have compassion for other people's stories and be able to say to my daughter, you had 2 sisters that have impacted how I parent you, and the fierceness with which I celebrate her, the fierceness of my symbolic action around her birthdays, when people are like, oh my God, we're really not just, which is what our whole other conversation was about. Like,
Yes.
I've just come for cake and like, can we just like keep it on the chill? I'm like, no, we got to sit down because we are celebrating this human's life, and that is so precious and so sacred. And I don't get to do this again. I have 1 child. I don't get to have this other experience. So we're going to do this all the way, from A to Z, all the way. That's my experience. But also, every child deserves to have their own place in the order. So she was not a replacement. And I think that's where it can start to get kind of sticky, right? With rainbow babies, sometimes like you are going to fill in for this loss. Like our first baby, she is her own. And our second baby, she was her own. And this baby, not so baby, she is her own.
Yes.
And having them be separate and differentiate between them, I think can be very helpful for the child, especially going forward.
That is so beautiful. Okay, how can we navigate the often very different grief journeys between partners?
Yeah, let's see. I think
This is something I get asked about a lot. I think a lot of couples struggle with this when they experience a loss. And I feel like that ring theory that we laid a foundation with is relevant here. as well, that the woman is in the center of the circle, and the husband, I would say, is like one ring out from that. So like, yes, can be deeply connected with the experience, and yet it happened within the mother's body. Like that is, so there are a lot of challenges that can come from that, whether it's the husband not really experiencing grief, which is, again, like we're talking about, like, that's okay. Like that is true for you, and that is all right. Like for me, in my pregnancy loss, I moved through all of the deep grief of it and felt immense grief. And I moved forward with a sense of gratitude that it played out as it was meant to and needed to play out, in the sense that I have the exact capacity to be the absolute greatest mother that I can be for the 3 children that I have.
Yes.
And I don't know if I would be able to say that if we had that fourth. So I just want to like bring that into like this discrepancy between partners having different experiences, like whatever each person's experience is, it's okay. Like the work is kind of to open up and make space for that. And how can you be accepting and supportive, in alignment with the rings, and move through that in a way that is like, that almost like strengthens your connection, as opposed to, facilitating disconnection.
Yeah. I'm so glad you're saying all of that, because I think the number one thing is, let's just accept there will be discrepancy.
Yes.
There will be, we're gonna pop this illusion while we're popping all kinds of illusions here and fantasies
and shoulds, like he should feel the same as I do, or society saying he should feel nothing because it wasn't his body, so he doesn't get to grieve. Like we're just popping all of those shoulds,
all of it. We're just all of it out. Like, okay, there's going to be a difference. So what can I do now? I think, the first thing is, how do we keep going after what we need? Like I kept thinking like, okay, when I'm old in my rocking chair, and my aunt would always say this, like, when you look back on your life, what will you be able to have lived with? What will you look back and go, I really needed that in that moment, but I didn't allow myself because. And I think that's the place that sometimes mothers can find themselves is giving themselves permission, like, well, my partner is not so upset, so I shouldn't be so upset. Or I really want to, like, naming, like we did not name our child for a very long time. I say we, but really it was he. I had a name. I had a name that was coming to me, year after year. There was her actual name. And there was a point where I had to allow myself to be separate in my grief and separate in my need for how I was going to continue to integrate my experience. And when I did that, I didn't have to be upset with him anymore that he was somehow blocking me from my full expression and my full integration. And I didn't ask him to be anything more than he was. And if I needed, people talk about like going to the hardware store for milk. If I needed somebody who was going to like get deep down and cozy and with me in a ritual, in a naming ceremony, it wasn't going to be him, and that was okay.
Oh, this is so big. This is so big, everybody listening. And this is true across the board, beyond the conversation of loss, that we cannot silently hope/expect our partner to meet our unspoken needs by being a version of themselves that they are not.
Yeah.
Instead, we actually have the power to meet our own needs/connect with the support we need to get those needs met. So it's about like unconditional love and acceptance going both directions. Like this partner, if my husband is not going to be down for a naming ceremony, that like that's okay. I can still have the naming ceremony. I can just give myself that. I can connect with the people who will be there for this, show up with snacks and whatever it is that I'm asking for, and be enthusiastically participatory in it. Awesome. We can get those needs met. So we're sort of not setting each other up to fail by hoping, expecting that they can just be what we need, usually without even communicating what it is that we need, and just be resentful that they're not in the exact same place as us, or experiencing it the same as us, or providing all of the things that we need without us even really knowing or articulating what they are.
Gosh, yeah, just so well put, because it is across the board. It is really across, like, it's not just about this very intense topic. It's anything.
Yes.
It really is anything. And I think that that's where, the groups, finding groups to go to, like, okay, I can go to this place where I'm really felt, and there's a lot of resonance, and I can get filled up and heard, seen, felt, heard in this way. And then I can come back. And I think that that's where, for me, the twice a month going to this group and meeting people, that I felt that desire, it's not, desire is not the word, but I felt what happens in grief, especially when two people share grief around the same thing. Like, he was also the place that reminded me of the grief. And I remember lying in bed one day, and I was so just feeling so shattered. And we were sleeping, and I wanted to turn towards him, but thought, oh, he's just going to remind me of the pain. And I remember wanting to turn away, like roll to the other side. And I forced myself, in this metaphor, to keep turning towards him with my grief, but in the way where I had no expectations. I could just keep showing him myself, because I felt like, wow, this is the time when people go separate ways.
Yeah.
This is the time when we could really veer off, because it's just too painful to interact with him, because he reminds me too much of it, and I begin to withhold myself. So all that we just talked about, of like, I'm going to go over here and do this thing because the other person can't necessarily be in that same space with us, also coupled, and this is that complexity we're talking about, like, also coupled with continuing to turn towards our partner.
Yeah.
And bring our vulnerability.
Yes. And ask for support in ways that they can give it, like accepting who they are, like maybe he's not going to come to a naming ceremony with you, but maybe you would actually feel really loved and supported if on the day of the naming ceremony, he made you breakfast in bed.
Yes.
Like, would you be willing to make me breakfast in bed? Like that.
Yeah. Oh.
You know what I mean? Like,
would you send me chocolate covered strawberries? I mean, everybody, hopefully everybody, like, will you just on this anniversary, you might not feel it on the same, but I'd love a box of chocolates.
Yes.
I don't know why, but that would mean so much to me.
Yes. And sometimes we learn what it is we're needing, like, as we go. Like my mom, when I was in like the deep end of that grief, I was like in my bedroom. It was pitch dark in the middle of the day, and I was laying in the bed just sobbing. My mom just came to my house, opened the bedroom door, closed it, dropped her stuff, climbed into the bed with me, wrapped her arms around me, and just held me for like an hour while I sobbed, which my mom, I sort of struggled to be present like throughout our relationship. And this was like this core time. Like, even when I was giving birth the other time, she was like reading a book. She was like, just to be present is hard for her. And in this moment, it was like exactly what I need. Like, I have never felt more loved in my entire life. I feel like than that moment. And I can like learn from that. Like as I navigate my grief, like I could then turn to other people and essentially ask for that same thing. Like I could ask my kids, like, is there anything we can do? Will you watch this TV show with me and laugh with me at the funny parts? Right. Like just to be able to like communicate, like to give people lines of connection, you know?
Yes. And being willing and being willing to accept the, especially from these very close, I mean, we're talking partners, right? And maybe children, like being willing to have something be good enough.
Yeah.
Like, just like, all right, like it would have been great if you had brought, like been willing to look at the baby clothes with me, but that's not where you're at. Yeah. You're at here. You made me this dinner. You acknowledged me in this way. Yeah. Just, wow, we are all struggling, and not to underestimate the amount that our partner is struggling as well. Yeah. They may not be struggling in the same way, but many partners experience intense feelings around pregnancy loss if they were not the one to be carrying the child.
And if the wife is usually the one that does the emotional labor for them, and then the wife is not available to do that emotional labor. That is another really common dynamic that I see. Like, so navigating that, like, I am supporting you by giving you permission and empowerment and acceptance and love to feel whatever comes up for you and to reach out to your next rings to get your needs met. I cannot do that for you. So you can connect with me pouring in this way. Right. But like, if that dynamic is that you're used to pouring into me and you cannot right now, like I cannot receive that for you. I cannot metabolize it for you, I should say. And you have my permission, blessing, love, acceptance of whatever is showing up with you is fine. If it's that you're happy and you're really not feeling it, the grief, that's fine. So you have my blessing to go on a boys' trip, go play tennis, go. Like if you have joy that needs to be expressed and it's not helping me here, like I accept that and meet that need. So again, that like acceptance and communication and Okay, the last question I have for us today is how can we honor the loss moving forward throughout our lives? This is a question I get a lot, typically in the form of, I can't bring myself to speak the baby's name out loud. And that sort of connects to this, like, I don't know, am I dishonoring them by not? How do I honor that this soul existed, right, in connection with me? How do I honor that moving forward?
Yeah. Well, that's just where the door is wide open. We're gonna all take shoulds and put it in a pretty little box and put should somewhere where it can frolic in should land and have a great time. There is no rule on how it has to be. It has been 19 years for me, and every year has looked different. Every year I have found myself, some days we called her baby girl, that was her name. And this year she is Aya Luz. This is who she is this year. I got brave enough to tell my family this year, it's her birthday tomorrow and I want to have a birthday party. And they were like, what? And I said to my daughter, would you help me make a cake? And she said, of course. And then I said, would you be willing to decorate it? Because she's an artist and she's decorated somebody else's cake beautifully. And she did. And we sat and we lit the cake. We lit the candles. I didn't make them sing happy birthday. I didn't make them do anything else. But just that little tiny bit. That was what we did this year. But that took 19 years.
Yeah.
What I'll need next year, I don't know. But every day I am in contact in some way, even in a way that I don't know. I'm having this conversation, coming here and being open and holding space with you for the many people who have had this experience, or the many who might have the experience. This is all the paying it forward, the recognizing how I am connected to so many through this experience. Just the honoring it can look so many different ways, and continuing to give ourselves permission also to celebrate. I had the grief right there with the celebration. Oh, wow. You know what? This year I want a dance party. That's all I want. I just want to invoke the spirit of play. And I'm not interested in crying. I'm not interested in hashing through the deep. I want to be light and playful, and that there is nothing, I'm not being disloyal in any way, and that the integration will continue for the rest of our lives. For the rest of my life, I will be integrating my experience. Just as you, I imagine, will be integrating your pregnancy loss, you'll be integrating the loss of your mother. I'll be integrating the loss of my grandmother when we are so close to death and we witness it and walk with it. That is something we integrate and process forever.
That is a beautiful way to end this conversation. We're going to move into the support section, which normally, it's like, hey, here's some links to dive deeper. But I really want to highlight for this episode, especially, these resources are like, this is an integrated part of the conversation, because a lot of what we're talking about is support for moving through this experience. So I really want to make sure no one is glossing over that, like, hey, we're putting some things in that toolbox for you. So what, Magdalena, are some resources to help people dive deeper into this topic?
Yeah, well, there are lots of links about how to get more information about miscarriage, about stillbirth, about terminations for medical reasons. There are options for joining groups and finding chats or stories. There'll be a couple of links about that in the resource notes, as well as links to some books about people processing, especially women of color, processing loss and what that looks like. And for anybody who resonated with my story or wants to know a little bit about me or how I might be able to support, I have a particular package that I've been working on as we think about ceremony and ritual and the integration piece of how we can have a time to tell our story around loss and some ceremony around that, and then some time to integrate, and then building that relationship with our children to help tell them about the loss, either that happened before them or that's happening that they know about in their current day, and the strategies for enhancing and impacting our bond. Well, this thinking about these layers of support, wanting to build a deeper bench for everyone in terms of who we can turn towards in moments of grief that come up around pregnancy loss.
Yes. So sagefamily.com/podcast101 will get you all of these links. We're going to link to Magdalena's website, her Instagram. I have a post that I wrote like in the depth of my grief when I was moving through my pregnancy loss, which still, like, from time to time, I'll go back and revisit it. And it feels like, wow, like, it's cool to get to have like this time capsule, almost this snapshot of the very raw, real things that I was moving through. And then I created an update like a year later that I'll also link in there, just so you can sort of connect in sisterhood with someone else who was moving through it. We're going to include that link to work with Magdalena, the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support Center. Let's see, National Share Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support, Sisters in Loss, helping after neonatal death. And so we're going to have lots of good links in there. So everybody go to sagefamily.com/podcast101 and check it out. Thank you sincerely to everyone who has bared witness to this conversation. It feels like a radical act of support for women everywhere, reverberating like up throughout history for the woman who did not have these stories witnessed, and then down through history for our children and our children's children to have created more space for these experiences and for these conversations to happen. So a sincere thank you to everyone who is listening to this conversation right now, all the way through, out of respect for this experience, for all uterus-bodied people everywhere throughout time. Thank you, Magdalena, so much, so sincerely, with my whole heart and soul, for coming here and having this conversation. I actually had on my board when I started planning this podcast like 5 years ago, pregnancy loss as a topic that I wanted to do in the first like 10 episodes. And it kept just not coming together. Like I couldn't quite find the right person. It wasn't quite the right moment in time. And then when I reached out about you coming back, about this topic, and you reached out with your follow-up, it just, like everything clicked into place, and it just felt like exactly what my soul needed, being a woman living in our society today. And I just want to thank you so humbly and sincerely for being my partner in this conversation.
I am deeply, deeply honored that you came back, that we got to come back. And it is episode 101. It's the 101. This is where it begins, baby. Here we are in sisterhood, being honest and real about what it means to be a mother, in all the grief and celebration, all the joy and all the deep heartache. It's all of it. And wow, what a privilege to be alive in this conversation with you at this time. My sincerest appreciations to all in my family who experienced this loss and who are right with me in as I talk about my experience. I am giving voice to them as well. So thank you for this opportunity.